I do want to touch on, I know we're getting carried away with the time, but there's so many things that I want to talk about. So we'll go a little longer, but I do want to talk about off air. You kind of mentioned, and I like this lens from you because you've been exposed to various training methods. You mentioned to me that CrossFit is not for everyone. And you know that there's certain people that, and this is beyond like their interest level. Let's say they want to do it, but you know that they're training for some type of field or court sport. They're training, we'll talk a minute about how you train for marathons. You know that some of this is going to be counterproductive into what you actually want to achieve. So just briefly, just to give the listeners out there, maybe they're looking to complement their current training methods. This will just give them some idea, I guess, as to, okay, this is what I need to consider as I'm starting to look into CrossFit, high intensity training, whatever it is. So explain a little bit about who you think it is suited for, but also what kind of training do you think this does not really work too well with?
The first thing that I would look at is the quality of the sport that you're trying to get into. So let's just go across a spectrum. Mm-hmm. For endurance athletes, CrossFit can be really, really good. Think about triathlon, like athletes, marathon runners, those types of people, because they don't tend to like doing those 5 to 8 minute really hard sessions. Mm-hmm. The problem comes in for those athletes where a lot of them have poor movement quality because they're only running, they're only biking. Hips aren't going through these long ranges of motions. Their ankles are super stiff because of all the mileage that they're putting on the ground. So maybe their shoulders are a little bit tender from all the swimming that they're doing. So CrossFit to be chosen carefully for that athlete. So if we are going to use CrossFit for that athlete, we need to make sure that we're having an appropriate exercise selection. And at that point, I don't think that group classes are necessarily the best thing in the world, but for the athlete that does retain movement quality, and I think that obviously with your background, you're going to be able to give better indicators of what like movement quality markers would be than I can. But for me, it's, can you still put both hands overhead with the elbows locked out and not need assistance getting into that? Can you do a squat, like with your heels on the ground, keeping your knees tracking and not like have that like significant lumbar curve or need to come into the toes, right? So if you do retain that, then CrossFit group classes would be an excellent addition to your program. Obviously that goes away once you get to the elite level, because once you become hyper specialized, like you just have to stay in your specialty. The middle ground kind of athletes, you think about soccer players, lacrosse players, rugby players. Those are probably your best candidates for a lot of CrossFit stuff because they live in this world of easy movement, hard, aggressive sprints. They need to be strong because they're getting hit or people are trying to move them, and they need to be able to repeatedly do that. Right. So that mimics, or CrossFit mimics, that demand probably more than any other sport. So I would say like those are good opportunities. We would still want to be very careful to only do CrossFit because rugby is not as rotational. I'm not that familiar with it. So somebody out there might be listening and have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'll just say. But like, I know lacrosse has a lot of throwing stuff and soccer is a lot of rotation. So you still need to take care of that and make sure that you're taking care of your joint health, your joints' ability to rotate, the body's ability to dissociate the upper and lower half and those kind of things that you're not going to get as readily in CrossFit. So really good, especially early off-season training for them. I think as you get closer to the season, you would want to tone that down. And then as you get into that really high power end of the spectrum, or just raw skill end of the spectrum, I don't know how much benefit it really has. So like a baseball player doing CrossFit, saying that as an athlete who did CrossFit for 4 or 5 years while playing football, I don't really know how much benefit it really has, right? You think about the average baseball play being about 5 seconds for a ball that's put in play, right? So like you don't see too many triples. When you hit a home run, no one's doing anything aggressive. So most of our game is confined to outs, singles, and doubles, right? A double at most is going to take 8 seconds. So why would we train this energy system that we know blunts your ability to produce peak power? And like the joint range of motion that you need to go through for baseball, like we don't need to add any more stress into the shoulder, right? So all of the kipping movements need to leave the program. I know Eric Cressy talks about not doing any pull-ups. I'm not sure that I fully agree with that, but you look at the group of athletes that he's coached and their credentials, and it's really hard to argue with that. So, you know, who am I to say no on that? But yeah, that's a tough sport to like really get on board with CrossFit. And then I think football, I know there was a trend around some football teams doing it. I think it could have a lot of good use off season, but I think it needs to be very tailored, right? It needs to be heavier, more interval based, a little bit less like 3-4 minute stuff and a lot more like 30 seconds of work, 60 to 90 seconds of rest.
Yes.
Like trying to mimic systems demands. And then the other thing that you have to be careful about with CrossFit is the tendency to get very lean doing that. And obviously if you have an offensive lineman dropping 15 or 20 pounds in the off season, that's a problem.
Yes.
So yeah, I think used across many sports, but you just have to be very selective about the application.
Yes. No, I like that explanation. And it's, you know, very thorough. I think obviously this could be a whole nother multiple series that we talk about, you know, the concepts of CrossFit, but you mentioned it there a little bit. And that was going to be my question, is because, you know, CrossFit is based around a lot of like different, I guess, products or advantages of metabolic conditioning, right? And you mentioned that a little earlier too. How much do you, let's say you do have a football player that comes in, how much do you change that, the structure of the work rest time ratio for these type of individuals to kind of still make it fit and get, I guess, that benefit that they need, right? Is that something that you find yourself tailoring a lot, or even when you were doing it as an athlete, is that something that it's not really the CrossFit philosophy, but, you know, is that something that you have experimented with?
Yeah. So when I coach, I guess I should say like all of our like coaching, when I say like I'm a coach, like I do individual one-on-one programs. So like I am writing the program tailored specifically to the athlete. Now, if I have multiple CrossFitters who are in the same gym, I might write some crossover sessions where they train together to push each other. But if I'm getting a field sport athlete, it is going to be 100% tailored to what they need. So I'm not necessarily like manipulating a class workout. If I were to manipulate a class workout for a CrossFit athlete though, or for a football athlete, let's say, I would definitely make things a lot more work rest based and tell them to get all of their aerobic support work in a non-impact manner, right? So like we still want to have good heart strength, just like the better aerobic system is, the better you're going to recover between plays, the more you're able to reproduce your power. But we don't need to have our heart rate sitting at 170 for that. Like you can do that at 110 beats per minute and not have the conflicting adaptation signals happening.
Yes, no, that's great information.